3100 North 112th, so for people that haven't been out there. I'm going to have Wendy come up now. Some of you haven't had a chance to meet Wendy, so she's going to come up and just mention a little bit about herself. She's our office administrator. She's been doing a lot of stuff, posting on social media, taking a lot of pictures and things like that. And maybe if you get lucky, sometime you'll be able to hear her play her guitar and singing out of Prairie Pines. Maybe we can get her talked into showing some of her talents. So Wendy, come up and introduce yourself to the group. No, I'll do that.
Hey everyone. Oh, hey. Boy, I grew up in this church. I've known Linda since I was about 10 years old. So it's kind of fun. We had it's nice to meet all of you. I'll keep it short. I'm kind of a behind the scenes person, but I'm really excited about Wachiska and all the amazing things that are happening. It's really neat to go to work every day in a forest and to work alongside the Prairie Pines people as well. And Sharon's here tonight, and I used to see Sharon at the Sheldon, and it's just really nice to see you. So if any of you have any questions, I would just really like to encourage you to call me up anytime at the office or send me an email. If you have any writing that you'd like to, or maybe you haven't ever written anything and you'd like to explore a subject, I would welcome that, and it would be wonderful to have some people putting in some writing to the newsletter. Yeah, come to the water catchment demo. It's free. And make a free donation to Wachiska if you'd like. That'd be great. And come to volunteer day. I hear there's going to be cookies.
Your office hours?
In person, Monday through Tuesday, 8 to 5. Monday through Tuesday. I should say Monday and Tuesday. And Wednesday remotely. But I tend to answer an email anyway if it comes in on another day. So, but if you really want to catch me in person, Monday and Tuesday. All right. Remember the cookies. That's it.
And like I said, and I've seen her personally play and sing, so she's got a great voice and plays the guitar, so maybe we'll have an event sometime. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to a person that many of you know, Kurt Donaldson. He's going to give a little update on the energy intensity use goal and the new planned central library project being planned for downtown. Several Wachiska members have expressed concerns to me about the new building and its energy efficiency, and mostly about all the glass that's involved in it and the bird strikes that might be a potential. So with that, I'll have Kurt come up, and I think there was a handout that got handed out that Ann had. And so Kurt, come on up, and if you want to use the microphone, might be the best. That way people can hear you. We'll let Kurt tell you.
We are live now, so.
Oh, we are live?
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody that's stuck around. Sorry about the inconvenience. So Kurt?
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the time to be here. And first to put in a plug for the church and for myself a bit. I was the energy coordinator for this project as we renovated the church in 2014, and we now have I think what is the lowest energy use of any commercial building in Lincoln. We have an EUI of 20.4, so we try to walk the walk. And I continue working on energy efficiency with the library. And let me start at the bottom here. I'm here because at the City Council on July 21st, there's going to be a hearing, which is people's only chance to say anything about the library. It's a project that's been fast-tracked without any public notice or attention. There's a lot of supporters for it. The skids are greased for it, but I and some others have got some concerns. So if you note you can also, there's an email address to the City Council, emails until next week, Thursday. That would be very important. But on what has been passed out, I'm just going to, you can read, but I won't read it, but I'll go over the points. I'll try to say it a little differently. Anyway, 4 years ago, you may remember, talk about the Climate Action Plan. It was a 100-page document to try to make sure that we're as ready as we can for global warming and trying to fight it and actually reduce CO2 and other greenhouse gases. It was passed in 2021, and part of that was that they said that the city will set up energy goals for new city buildings and a way to measure those goals. And Fact is, they've had 4 years to do it. They've been seeking government grants, but when it comes time to building this library project, which is the biggest project on the city's horizon, they have not given it any goals or a way to measure it. And so I and a few folks thought, well, we'll just do an amendment which would take care of that just for this project. And so we've come up with a metric, which is a national standard. It's called the EUI. It's the total amount of square foot of energy used in a building each year, and divided by the total square footage, and you get a number which is essentially the energy cost per square foot. And then we've said, well, we can also establish a goal since you don't happen to have one. And we've looked at the performance of Lincoln Public Schools, and they are a national leader. They probably have the most efficient school system in the country, which I worked on 35 years ago to get them into geothermal heating and cooling systems. We have it here in the church. I don't know that they'll be able to do that totally on the new library. I'm not pushing it. I think air source heat pumps will probably do fine because, interestingly, geothermal heat pumps are not going to work as well with global warming. You get too much heat out of them. They generate too much heat in the summer. Put it underground, it's more heat than you need. So anyway, I digress. We've come up with an energy target based on what Lincoln Public Schools have done. They have been able, their average in their entire system is 36.3. So we've started out with a goal saying, why don't we set a target of 35, but then we've also adjusted that to the fact that libraries are used a lot more each year. They're open about twice as many days as the schools are, so that affects their energy use. So I've done the calculations, and it looks like 50 is about the right number. It's a comparable number when it's adjusted for days of operation. So it's performance-based. If the architect can make all this glass work, fine. I doubt it. I think it's much more likely that they will, if they are not given a goal, if they are not given a target by the city, they'll wind up closer to the national median average, which is noted in here at 71.6, or higher. They might not even make the national median. I think it'll be an embarrassment to Lincoln and a real burden to the taxpayers from now until 2075 or until the end of the century, which is probably how long this library will last. And I think that's probably about my 5 minutes, isn't it? Yep. So anyway, emails to the city council, show up. If you want to do testimony, get in touch with me, and we're coordinating testimony. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Oh, I'm looking for a CPA.
You remember in those letters you talk about energy efficiency, also mention all the glass and bird strikes, because we've had a lot of bird strikes on the university campus down there, and I think it's going to be a big problem. So talk about the energy efficiency and bird strikes if you're going to write a letter to the city council. So with that, thanks Kurt for coming in and giving us an update. I'm going to ask that any Wachiska board members present stand and be recognized. I want everyone to realize some of the board members. We've got a couple here tonight. I see Doug in the back and Teresa and Ross. So thank you, in April. So thank you very much for coming tonight and being available and being on the board. Now I'll take just a couple minutes quickly and see if there's any unusual bird sightings. Does anybody have anything good at the feeders or the bird baths at their place? Had a lot of activity out at Wachiska. They're mostly more common birds, but had a lot of fun. We have a female cardinal that has a nest just outside the front door, about 10 feet out the door, so Wendy and I can look out and monitor her. She's got 4 eggs, and so we'll keep an eye on her. Any unusual sightings? We got anything special? Anything going on? Bruce, have you been out anywhere? You usually get out and about.
It's not fair to talk about the sand hills, but we did.
Well, you can give us a little preview of what you might saw. Here comes a microphone. We'll let you talk and tell us what you might saw. I suppose maybe some curlews or some good stuff.
Testing.
There you go. Or some swans.
Thank you. April and I spent 4th of July out in the sand hills at Uncle Buck's Lodge
Yep.
in Brewster. And that evening, when we first got there, we saw or heard sandhill cranes in the North Loop River. We were blown away. And we took drives, and there was intermittent rain. We saw the usual yellow-headed blackbirds. There were pelicans, dick sissels we saw, upland sandpipers, a nesting trumpeter swan in one of the ponds, and just a myriad of other birds. It was a thrill. Really, really fun.
Good, good. Okay.
There were bobolinks at the Table Rock Prairie when we were down there.
Oh, bobbling. And there was a, what was it, a scissor-tail flycatcher.
Oh, yes.
Yep, down there. We think it had a nest up on one of the telephone poles. It was bringing nesting material in.
Yeah.
So, yep. Okay. Anything else? Got something?
My wife feeds birds, and she had 5 flickers in the yard at one time this week.
5 flickers.
Last week.
Yeah, usually they don't get along with each other, so usually if you get more than 2, they get a little ramrodding, but we've had 1 or 2 come up to the suet out at Prairie Pines, but usually not that many, so.
Maybe
Okay.
the same family.
Yeah, maybe it was. It was last year's offspring, maybe. Anybody else have anything? Well, we're kind of going along, so we'll go ahead and get into the next part here then. This is a reminder that tonight's presentation, like past presentations, now we know we're on YouTube. I wouldn't have been able to say that a few minutes ago, but I'm glad anyone that's still hanging in there tonight and stayed on, because you'll get to see the main presentation. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce tonight's presenter. It's Michaela Cherry. Michaela is a physical scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey in the Central Plains Water Sciences Center in Lincoln. She joined USGS in 2021. She has worked on several projects revolving around water quality research and specializing in groundwater age dating. She will give an overview of the Nebraska aquifers and their uses and drawbacks. She will discuss current research across the state, and she'll take questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I give you Michaela.
Hi everyone, I'm going to stand down here because I really like the laser pointer and it doesn't work as well when you're up there. So I'm Michaela. I'm from the U.S. Geological Survey, which is a federal agency. Our state office is here in Lincoln, and we also have a field office in North Platte. I could talk about, my clicker doesn't want to work.
Oh, yes.
I could talk about groundwater for much longer than I think anyone would want to listen to it. And so I'm going to do my best to try and condense down an overview of Nebraska groundwater and hydrogeology. So we'll talk a little bit just about what groundwater is and where is it in Nebraska and things like that. And then we'll talk about some of the groundwater concerns here in the state and then some of the research that's going on to address it. And I will admit all of the research is mine because that's what I felt comfortable talking about. So we're not going to cover everything, but hopefully it'll be a good overview. So starting off with geology. On the left we have a bedrock map of the state. In general, the bedrock is oldest in the southeast and it gets younger as you go west. So 300 million years ago, I promise I won't do a ton of geology. 300 million years ago, Nebraska was underwater, and that's when we got the Pennsylvania kind of shale units, and so that's kind of here in the southeast part of the state. And then about 100 million years ago, we ended up with the Dakota and kind of the sandstones that are in still the eastern part of the state. And then when we move much faster into like, let's see, up here, what is that, 5 million years ago, we have the Ogallala, which is probably one of the more well-known geologic units in the state, and that's what we have in yellow. It covers a lot of the state. It's like a main bedrock. And so on the right, we have kind of the geologic history through time and how that relates to the different aquifers. And so we get older as we go down. And so the Pennsylvanian that I mentioned is down here. These aquifers are very salty. They are not useful. They're like 500 feet deep. Ignore them as aquifers. I know they say they exist, but they don't. And then as we move up, I mentioned the Dakota. There is a Dakota aquifer. It's used mostly like the Papio, Missouri, NRD, like Omaha area would be where you tap into the Dakota. And then the most well-known aquifer in the state, which we'll talk about a lot, is the High Plains aquifer, also known as the Ogallala aquifer. We tend to call it the High Plains because you find it in more than just the Ogallala geologic unit, and so to be less constricting. So if I say High Plains, I mean Ogallala, same thing. And then above that, we have like alluvial aquifers, streambed aquifers, and things like that. And so, looking at a map of Nebraska and kind of our aquifer system, we have the high plains in light blue. As you can see, it covers the majority of the state. It's a very large aquifer, both in Nebraska and all of the Midwest. The Dakota is here in this kind of tan color. The reddish color are, we call them paleo valleys, so they're ancient stream beds. And so stream beds right below streams tend to make really good aquifers. So even if they aren't streams anymore, they still tend to make good aquifers. So those are ancient stream bed aquifers. And so one of the things about aquifers is you can talk about them on a variety of scales. So like if you're talking about the US and important aquifers, you would mention the high plains. But say you are someone living in eastern Nebraska, this like is the Omaha area, so like the Papio NRD. You'd be like, oh, well, there's not really like a lot of water there, you know. There's the Dakota, but there's nothing. But like if you zoom in on a different scale, we actually do have a number of different aquifers that have different properties. So there's in pink, the Missouri alluvial aquifer. The Platte is down here in green for the Platte alluvial. The Elkhorn is in purple. The Dakota is underlying all of it with the dots is how it's represented. And then the upland aquifer exists. It's not a great aquifer, but it is an aquifer. So like scale is really dependent when we talk about aquifer systems. So that's our just like very brief overview of aquifers. So now we're going to talk about all of our concerns with our aquifers in the state. And so they kind of fall into two categories, quantity and quality. So do you have the water in the first place? And is that water useful to whatever purpose you want to be used for? And depending on its purpose, you know, like something that's not good for drinking can still be good for agriculture or, you know, different uses. And so when we talk about groundwater quality, we have human contaminants, so things like nitrate and pesticides. We have naturally occurring contaminants like arsenic and manganese, and then uranium is a weird one, we'll talk about it, but it's natural, but we are making it worse as humans, so natural-ish. So we'll start off, though, with groundwater quantity. And I feel like in the news we hear a lot of the Ogallala aquifer is going dry and everyone in Kansas is selling their farms and there's nothing left, and you know, like they're very dramatic, like there's no water left. And for parts of the High Plains aquifer, that is very much true. There are a number of farms in Kansas where it's not the aquifer is rebounding, it's we are managing what we have left, knowing it will run out. Nebraska is not that case, or at least not yet. I'm not saying we couldn't get there if we tried, but we're not there right now. And so we have on the left, groundwater declines, we call it pre-development, so like 1950s, because that's when pivot irrigation really started. And this map is compared to 2013. I can tell you if you take it out to 2023, 2025, it doesn't look much different. Like it's similar-ish. So for Nebraska, we do have some declines in the southwest, which makes sense. There's a lot of agriculture, plus it's the driest part of the state. And then we also have not a lot, but we have some declines along the Platte in like southeast-ish, central-ish. But we also have areas where the aquifer has gained more water than it had pre-development. And so the Sandhills have not a lot. The Sandhills have a lot of water to start with. And so they also have had more water. And Sandhills are a really great spot for aquifer recharge because sand, it's really easy. The water just goes straight through. Like if it's an undisturbed system, it's great for groundwater recharge. And then we also have a few spots in the state. The one that stands out the most is South Central, like Grasper, Phelps, Kearney counties. And that's because they built a diversion off of the Platte and they have all of these canals. And so before pivot irrigation was a really big thing, they did a lot of canal flood irrigation to the point that like the groundwater level was like at people's basements. And they're like, we maybe did too much. And so it's currently they try and manage it so that like they still have canal irrigation, but they have enough pivot irrigation to offset it. So the mound exists, but it's no longer rising or falling. So there is a groundwater mound, and it's theoretically stable. And so I mentioned before that Nebraska has a lot of groundwater, and so on the right we have the saturated thickness. So this is like how deep the High Plains Aquifer is. As you can see over the sandhills, like it's a lot, like 1,000 feet of aquifer, like that's a lot of water. It's a lot. And so obviously like groundwater is difficult to move, right? Like you don't want to like pump something out of the sandhills and like send it all the way to Lincoln. So like we do still have to manage the aquifer on like the smaller scale, like the Southwest, you know, needs to be looking more into, you know, are we irrigating too much? Do we need to put in restrictions and things like that? But as like a whole, groundwater is a really great resource in Nebraska. Like it exists. And this is just kind of to pair up with where we see some of the like declines match kind of where like the irrigation well density is greatest. And so along the Platte there's a lot of farms, there's a lot of pivots, there's a lot of irrigation happening. Really everywhere in the High Plains that isn't the sandhills, we have a lot of agriculture. As you guys live here, you know, there's a lot of corn. And so irrigation has impacts on both water quantity, but it also has impacts on water quality. And so our next map is going to be groundwater nitrate. It's great. See how the red lines up with all of where the pivots are? And so one of the reasons why I think we might not necessarily want to talk just about groundwater quantity on its own and restrictions on its own is because one of our better ways to manage things like groundwater nitrate is going to be to limit irrigation, which is not something anyone wants to hear. And I'm not making this as an official recommendation of the U.S. government. This is me talking, not the government. But it's going to be one of the better management tools that we have. This is from NDEE, which is no longer called NDEE. It's now DWEE.
Water,
DWEE.
energy, and environment.
Yes. But this is one of their predictive groundwater nitrate maps based on sampling, and so really anything that's like dark orange or red is bad for your health. So the drinking water standard for nitrate is 10 milligrams per liter. If you live in a city, so like if you're here in Lincoln, you're on Lincoln Water, they take care of that for you. Like if the nitrate in the Platte well field, which is where Lincoln's well field is in Ashland, like on the Platte River, and a bunch of big groundwater wells that take it up from the aquifer. If that happens to be above 10 milligrams per liter, they take care of it before they send it to your faucet. However, if you are on a farm, which 80% of Nebraskans are on, and 80% of Nebraskans use groundwater as a resource, as their drinking water, but not all 80% are on farms, but a lot of them are. It's up to you to both monitor and manage this yourself, if you choose. There's nothing that says you have to. You probably should, just from a human health aspect. And so, unfortunately, the best way to deal with it is a reverse osmosis filtration system that goes like under your sink, so you'd like put it under your kitchen sink. The good news is that it will deal with more than just nitrate. If you have any other issues like atrazine or arsenic or magnesium, it'll take care of that too. The bad news is that it's expensive and it only works so well. So like if the water coming out of your well is 20 milligrams per liter, yeah, you're probably fine. If it's 60, the filtration system can only handle so much. So then you're looking into like a series of filters and it gets even more expensive. So it's better to not have the problem. But we have the problem, so sorry to hear. And then going along with that, atrazine is a common pesticide. It's one of the ones that's the most tested for, so that's why I put the map up, but it's definitely not the only one. So this map just shows hits versus not hits. So everything in red is not necessarily above the limit, but it's pretty close because that limit is pretty small because it's 3 parts per billion, and you can only measure so much, right? And I can't remember what atrazine's detection limit is, but everything in red is really close to that limit if it's not above. And atrazine is not great. It's linked to pediatric cancer, low birth rates, other birth defects, miscarriages. It might be bad for grown-up humans too, but I don't remember what that research is. So it's not great, and it's not going to degrade in groundwater. In surface water, it will degrade under UV light, so it'll slowly break down in the sun. Groundwater doesn't have the sun, so it will stay and accumulate forever. Yeah, you can ask a question now.
What's the source of the atrazine?
Farmers applying it.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's a farm chemical?
Yeah, it's a pesticide, yeah. A pretty common one. So yeah, atrazine isn't great. It's also, I'm not super clear on this research because it's been out of my scope, but they've been doing more research with pesticide and nitrate compounds that form in groundwater that are apparently really not great for you. So the combination of the nitrate and things like atrazine is even worse than if you just had them separately. So those are human things, but don't worry, your groundwater could be naturally contaminated by nothing that you did at all. And so this one is actually harmless in terms of a health thing, but it's just an example of data I had. So iron is a fairly common groundwater contaminant in the sense that it's kind of a nuisance. So once you get above the 300 micrograms per liter or 300 parts per billion, you're gonna start noticing the taste, it tastes like iron, and you get the rings in your toilet that are really hard to get out, or your tub. It's really common in alluvial aquifers, which is why the Missouri has so much iron in it, and it's just part of the geology. It's so much. It's honestly a pain to sample because it clogs up filters really easily, but that's another issue. So all of this data is from a long-term 32 year, this is year 33 of this study. We've been sampling for the Papio, Missouri NRD. So this is all of the iron we've ever collected, and then this data is just from the past year. So the Missouri alluvial is really high in iron, but all of this area, because it's all alluvial, glacial, till geology type stuff, tends to be high in iron, and some other ones. So manganese is one of these other ones. It technically doesn't have a legal limit, but it has a recommended limit, and I wouldn't be surprised if a legal limit is coming soon. High manganese causes Parkinson's-like symptoms, so it can be problematic, especially when you're exposed to it over long periods of time. It's not an acute exposure thing. And so manganese tends to be really common in glacial aquifers, which is what all of eastern Nebraska is, because that's where all of the glacial activity was in the state. And so all of these aquifers have spots that are high in manganese. And again, a reverse osmosis filter or having city water is kind of how you deal with it. But some of these I feel we talk a lot in the news about nitrate and atrazine, but and so people who maybe they're oh well, I'm not near a farm, I don't need to worry about my groundwater, I don't do it. But there are still other contaminants, unfortunately, that are just there that you have to deal with. And then the last one is arsenic. It is also very common in alluvial aquifers based on the geology and the redox chemistry. And so we can kind of find it throughout the state, especially along the Platte and the Niobrara, and down in the Republican too, it looks like there's some. So this is the doom and gloom part of the talk. It's great. And then the last contaminant that we'll talk about is scary, but I think it's fun because it's not good, but it's really interesting what's going on here. So uranium occurs naturally in Nebraska geology. And what I mean by that is down in the groundwater in the geology, there is uranium and it's sorbed to the rocks. So it's down there, but it stays down there. However, there's been a lot of research out of UNL that when you introduce nitrate to that groundwater system, it like changes all of the redox chemistry that's going on, and so that uranium that was stuck there, nice and safe, is no longer stuck, and so it starts coming off, and now it's in your groundwater. So then you pump it up to drink it, and it's now a problem. And so we, again, like if you remember that map of where all the high nitrate is, it also is corresponding where a lot of these uranium hits have been as well. And there are some rare cases where you can have high uranium without any nitrate, and that's kind of just got really unlucky with like the geology that you have. But our nitrate is making our uranium worse. Good news, reverse osmosis filter. Now I feel like I'm an ad sales for this. Reverse osmosis filter does still work for uranium, but you can't throw it away. You have to have a hazardous waste because it's radioactive. So also don't let your children sleep under your sink if you have that. Or you also don't sleep under your sink. Not great, but so. There's a lot of like new research coming out of UNL looking at the mechanisms behind why the nitrate is displacing the uranium and like what factors influence it and things like that, like what kind of time frames we're looking at, because obviously we've had nitrate for a long time and uranium, so like it would be really interesting to do like a, with groundwater age dating, like a study looking at that correlation of increasing nitrate over time and increasing uranium. So now we get to the slightly more fun part. I'm not going to say I have like answers to any of these problems, but we're going to talk about science that maybe has more guidance, if not answers. So the first one, ooh, this looks really small. So I apologize. The first thing we have are groundwater level trends. So one thing Nebraska is really good at is collecting groundwater levels. As you can see, there are a lot of data points on these graphs. Other states, not so great, which makes trends difficult, but Nebraska is really good at it, so we have some really nice trend periods, and in general, like, so we have, so this is like trends from 1980 to 2020, and then if we look at just 1990 to 2020, and then just like 2000 to 2020. In general, all of the trends kind of had the same theme, right? Like, the Southwest is kind of decreasing no matter what time period you're looking at. The mound is kind of increasing no matter what time period you're looking at. But things do kind of weird things. Like along the Platte, like, what is that, upper Big Blue area, York-ish, Grand Island. So like depending on what time period, and there are some like gray trends where like statistically nothing is happening, or nothing you can talk about. But they do kind of like fluctuate. So like on a long time span, it's like, oh, well, yeah, it might be increasing, but like if we're just looking at the last 20 years, it's like, but maybe not. So like from there, you'd probably want to like actually dig into what those like individual wells look like on a year-to-year basis. And this can be influenced both by like climatic shifts, like certain decades have been drier than others or wetter than others, and some of that also influences how much irrigation you have, and since you're so close to the Platte, some of that irrigation is coming from the Platte and not from the groundwater, and so we can be cycling through and changing the groundwater levels based on that. But in general, outside of like Southwest Nebraska, people don't like, a lot of the NRDs do take groundwater levels every year, and they do look at them, and they do like notice trends, and like the drought the last few years has definitely like that's been noticed, but there's not like a lot of active management happening based on that. But there's a lot of words on the slide. So the next thing we're going to talk about for the next few slides is the concept of legacy nitrate. So we saw those maps, we saw all the really high nitrate, and so if I were to go out and sample, I don't know, someone's well, anyone's well, you say it's 150 feet deep, I sample, and the nitrate is 12 milligrams per liter. Well, that's great. But if you don't know how old that water is, it can't tell you if your current like nitrate management practices are working. so by dating the water, you can kind of back calculate it to like, oh, like what are the practices? And since we have changed them, has that changed? You know, like basically, is our old water all the high nitrate, or is our young water still high nitrate, or is it going down? That's kind of like the concept of what's happening. And so the age dating is used as a way to look at those management strategies and if they're working or not. And so there are a number of ways to date groundwater, and that could be a whole other lecture on its own that I think would be a bit too much in terms of keeping everyone awake tonight. So just the basic concept is, say we have rain, irrigation, whatever happens, it goes through the vadose zone, which is this unsaturated zone. It hits our water table. It's officially in our aquifer, and that's when the time starts. And so from there, groundwater moves both down and sideways, depending on which direction it flows, depends on where you are. In general, Nebraska, groundwater flows from west to east because it follows the elevation gradient. So your groundwater moves in kind of these like flow paths. So it's not just going down or just going sideways, it's like arcing. So because of that, the deeper you are, the older your groundwater is. And so you would go here, you'd have a well, you would sample it. Depending on how old you think it is, depends on what kind of like analysis you send it through. And then it goes through a lot of calculations, and then you come up with an age. And sometimes it can get a little tricky when you're close to streams or other places where like there's upwelling happening, and you get like a mix of like a lot of really old water and young water, and then you still end up with an age, but it's a little wonky because it's like a mix of a lot of different ages. So that's just like the concept of groundwater age. And so in general, groundwater should get older as you get deeper. This is a mix of a couple projects for groundwater age and groundwater nitrate. And so on the left, we have our age as it gets older, and then we have the depth of our well. It gets deeper as you go down. And this is not a very great plot in the terms of like, if you tried to like put a linear regression through it and like use any kind of stats, it would be like, there's no correlation between age and depth. Like you have lied to me on this slide. And it's true, there's not, and it's because there's a lot of mitigating factors when it comes to groundwater age, and it's very like spatially dependent. And so, you know, like if you have a lot of clay, that's gonna like slow things down versus, so like maybe something that's shallow but with a lot of clay could be older than something that's deeper but it's like just gravel. And so those kind of like recharge rates play a role in it. And the only time you really get worried that something has gone wrong is if you have like two wells next to each other and the shallow one is like reading is really old compared to the younger one, and then you know like something has gone wrong in your sampling, and that's a you issue, not a groundwater issue. And then on the right we have the date that groundwater was recharged, so like the date that water and associated nitrate entered your water table, versus like what that nitrate is. So, we went the wrong way. So we start kind of like as we started irrigating plus using industrial fertilizer, and we can see our groundwater nitrate starts creeping up. And then there's some places where it's like really, really high. And 2000 is about when NRD started putting management practices in. But even that can be kind of hard to tease out because they're not necessarily the same practice over the entire NRD, like they're focused on townships, and so it can be really hard to like dig into like the specific data. But it kind of seems like the newest samples, our youngest samples, are getting better. Like they're not great, because like these are all still like at or above the like drinking water limit, but they're not like 6 times the drinking water limit. So it could be that like management strategies are starting to show progress, but it's it's not like amazing. And then this is just kind of an example to show looking at that groundwater movement aspect. So we have the groundwater mound that we talked about here, where there's all the canal infiltration and it caused the groundwater to rise. And so you might be like, well, like, okay, it's just there. It doesn't matter what the nitrate is because like it's a mound. But the mound, the water in the mound moves even if like the shape of the mound itself doesn't appear to. So the top we have kind of that groundwater mound in terms of like how much it's risen since 1950. And then the bottom, based on some tracer analysis, shows as you get deeper, that like mound signature is moving to the east. So the groundwater levels make it seem like the mound is like just there, but the actual water is still moving. And so it takes any contaminants that are there with it. And so they're just kind of trying to give you a visualization of that like movement with depth. Okay, and then the last concept, because I know we've covered a lot tonight, is trying to use a way to visualize groundwater quality without having to sample the groundwater. And so for this case study, I guess, we tried to use center pivot irrigation systems to predict the underlying groundwater quality, which I recognize sounds a little bit insane when you say it like that. So the idea was that where we have rusty pivots, like these pivots that look red, like this guy, we don't have groundwater nitrate. And I will explain why we think that in a second. But how we went about testing that hypothesis was, I was doing my PhD and COVID happened and I couldn't do any field work and I needed to do something to like make progress. And so I looked at 700 pivots on Google Earth, which is a very tedious process. And I went a little bit insane. That's okay. And then after I categorized all 700 pivots on Google Earth, I went and looked at 250 of them in person and matched up, okay, like, does this pivot match what I saw on Google Earth? Sometimes they like didn't exist or they got moved or things, and then I categorized them as like a fully rusty pivot, a partially rusty pivot, or like no rust. And this is not the best picture, it gets really blurry, but it's an example of what that looks like. So like the top is like a rusty pivot on Google Earth, and then that same pivot when I went out and looked at it in person. And then the second one is a non-rusty pivot, and then the last one is a part rusty pivot, and that's where this methodology falls apart a little bit because you can't see a part rusty pivot on Google Earth because they're all the drop nozzle ones, so it just rusts the bottom half and you can't tell. So if we could all switch to the less effective top pivots, it would be really great for this research, but no. And so it does kind of hold up that like you can use Google Earth instead of just driving around to at least get like the base assessment of what a rusty pivot is. And so when we correlated that to our nitrate, blue is our non-rusty pivots, and so you can't really tell anything about groundwater quality from a non-rusty pivot. It might be really high, the nitrate might be high, the nitrate might be low, like you can't tell anything. However, when you have the fully rusty pivot, none of those samples had groundwater nitrate above our 10 milligrams per liter, which is really great because you don't need to spend the time sampling a rusty pivot if you know that you're not going to have nitrate. And you're still like, Michaela, you have not explained why on earth a rusty pivot would mean you don't have any nitrate. So this is when we get into the microbiology part of the talk. You guys thought you were just here for groundwater. So in our groundwater, there are microbes and little bacteria, and they like to eat things because everyone has to eat something. But they have a preference on what they want to eat based on what is easiest for them. The analogy of it is if you are really hungry, a Snickers will give you energy much faster than eating salad. It's more fun to eat a Snickers than salad. So our little microbes in our groundwater will preferentially eat oxygen first. So they will go through and they'll eat all the oxygen. Once they've eaten all the oxygen, they will then go on and eat all of the nitrate. Once they've eaten all of the nitrate, they will go on and eat all of the manganese. Once they've eaten all the manganese, they go on and they eat all of the iron. And so the byproduct of them eating the iron is they basically like poop out this reduced iron. The reduced iron is now in your groundwater, just hanging out. You pump it through a pivot, it hits oxygen, it oxidizes, and it coats the pivots. So none of the rusty pivots are actually rusting themselves, they're just getting this coating of iron from the groundwater because the microbes have eaten all the way down. And because we're down here with the iron, it means they've already eaten through all of that nitrate. So that's why there's no nitrate where we have the rusty pivots. And it doesn't hold up everywhere. Like you can, like you did see like some of these are like verging on 10, right? Like they're not like 0. And part of that is because, you know, like irrigation pivot screens are like really, really long. I mean like 100 feet, not like 6. Because then you can get more water. Whereas like a house or a monitoring well might be like a 10-foot screen. And so you have a lot of water mixing, which might be part of it as to why it's not like a perfect like 0 nitrate kind of situation. But it holds up pretty well. So like if you're an NRD manager, you only have so much money, you can only do so much sampling every year. You can use this as a very like low budget way to map out where in your NRD you should maybe focus on versus not focus on. Is kind of where this whole concept was going. And so we're working on expanding it. This was all just done in like south central Nebraska, like Phelps, Kearney, Adams County. Oh yeah, I forgot this slide was next. So these 3 counties, Phelps, Kearney, Adams County, so like Hastings, Holdridge area. And so on the top we have rusty pivots, and so they don't tend to occur like, it's not random, like they tend to occur in clumps. And so part of that is that like that's just the areas where you have the microbes and the bacteria and the carbon, like it's just like the perfect setup for all those conditions to occur. Because you don't always have those bacteria everywhere in the groundwater. It'd be perfect if you did, because eventually they would just get rid of all the nitrate for you, but sadly that doesn't always happen. So we have our rusty pivots, and they tend to occur where we have the low nitrate, and then that also matches up kind of spatially where that high iron is. It's kind of just what these figures are showing, that it's not necessarily just like a random system. So like if you were, this splits 2 different NRDs, but if you were one of these NRDs, you could go out and say, oh, like this is fine. I'm gonna focus my sampling strategy over here. And I think that's all I had. So.
Wow.
Happy to take any questions.
Were those counties? Are those counties?
Yeah, it's, yeah,
The one in the
Phelps.
center is Phelps?
Kearney County is the middle. Phelps is on the left. Yeah, Phelps, Kearney, Adams.
We have 2 microphones,
Pardon?
so if you have a question, raise your hand and they'll bring a microphone around to you.
Again, left to right on the.
Yeah, so left to right, it's Phelps County, Kearney County, Adams County.
Okay.
And it's that same location where that groundwater mound is. It's where all my PhD work was, so there's a lot of data there.
I'm from Phelps, that looks pretty honest.
There was a big push on, I remember in even the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, about filling in, there's a lot of these abandoned wells all over the state of Nebraska. And there was a big push, and you don't hear about it. Is that still going on, the NRD, because they thought that was going to be an effective, you know, have a positive effect on things? And where's that at, and what's happened?
So abandoned wells are still definitely a concern in some places. I couldn't tell you, like how many of them have been properly, sealed versus still need to be dealt with. I do know there's a project someone in our office was doing. They were working with Upper Big Blue, and one of the things they were working on was mapping these like still abandoned wells to try and see if that was like locations of like nitrogen hotspots. And I could not tell you what the results of that were. But it is still something I think that the NRDs are aware of and does still exist to some extent. And it is true, like, so if you have a well that's been abandoned and it's not like properly been sealed, and you have like runoff from a field, it's just like a straight conduit into the groundwater, so it's gonna like take nitrate with it. So that was the thought process behind properly decommissioning all of these abandoned wells. that like, even if we did fix all of that, we still are gonna have a few problems beyond it. But it is, I think, something people are slowly still trying to address.
I also remember at the time too, working in the newspaper covering that, it was not only that the water was going down, but a lot of them were used to be dumping their garbage.
Yeah,
dead
yeah.
animals, and it was quite an interesting thing.
Maybe repeat that.
Oh yeah, so like not just water going down the well, but like people are using them basically as trash pits. So you're just dumping things straight into your aquifer. Just not a great use of an aquifer.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed the first part of your talk, and unfortunately Mark just said it's not going to be on YouTube. So we'll have to meet you for a private talk.
It is.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
The very first few minutes to,
I thought that, yeah, the first part wasn't. Well, anyway. So I'm fascinated by a lot of what you said. My awareness is from Eleanor Rogan in Omaha that all the people concerned with public health at UNMC are trying to get the nitrate level down, the acceptable level down to 3 parts per million. And we all know that EPA is in great shape right now, right? So it's hard to know if that's ever going to go anywhere. That's question 1. Question 2, being a skeptical scientist myself, there are other reasons why rust would occur, not just being coated by water, which has gone through certain biogeochemical changes. So that's kind of going around in my head. And finally, the microbes, I've never heard of that at all. Could we add that to certain water? I mean, I just drove through Des Moines. I was in Minneapolis this morning. I've been speeding to try to get here. And they're really in crisis. They haven't had enough water this summer. Their denitrification plant connected to the Des Moines River can't work right now. They've banished all watering of lawns right now. So I'm thinking, wow, maybe we could use some microbes in Detroit. So those are my 3. 3 points per million, other ways to cause rust than what you just described, which is brilliant and certainly could, but wouldn't there be other ways as well? And 3 is, could the microbes work in other situations? Thank you.
Yeah, so the 3 parts per million for nitrate is partly associated because they do think the 10 parts per million is too high overall, but it also deals with the pesticide and the atrazine aspect. So like having both of those together, like you need a much lower limit to make it safe if you have both of them. And so that's kind of where that 3 parts comes in. I don't know if the EPA is going to exist in a year. I'm trying not to be doom and gloom, but like my job could go at any day too, so it's great. I think it's going to take a lot of court cases to get it to be lowered at all. I don't know that that's something we'd see anytime soon. But like, it's not to say that it couldn't happen on a state level too. You know, like states can make those laws too. I'm not saying that would happen here either. But I don't know, maybe we can petition Lincoln Water Systems or Omaha. They get most of theirs from the Missouri River. But and then the second thing, there are other things that can cause corrosion in irrigation pivots. It tends to be linked to, again, the groundwater that goes through it. And you're looking at places that have, I'm trying to remember. Okay, I talked to someone from Valley, and there are places that have high chloride, and I want to say tended to have like high calcium and magnesium as well. And I don't have the figure here, but I did map like this area with those various things that could cause rust, and like they were all fairly low. So like they aren't areas where you'd probably, at least here, not to say that in other locations that's not what's happening, but in this area where we did the study, there didn't tend to be like a lot of chloride or a lot of calcium or magnesium that might be causing corrosion. I also talked to a lot of producers in the area, and like it's something they're very aware of, right? Like it's their pivots, and they're like, oh yeah, you know, like you put a pivot in and a year later it's rusty, but it works fine and it's not a big deal. And so other locations it might not hold up as well. And then the third one, sadly the microbes would not work in Des Moines' case because most of their stuff comes from the Raccoon River and the Des Moines River. And to get the microbes to eat the nitrate, they have to eat all the oxygen first, and there's no world in which they could eat all the oxygen in surface water. It's only in groundwater where they're not getting more oxygen and that they can go through it. And I don't think anyone has ever, I have gotten this question many times to be like, well, can't we just like find these and dump them down a well? To which I say, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not the person to ask. Like in theory, maybe, but again, I don't think anyone's looked at the time frame, but it would be more of a short-term solution than a permanent solution, because the microbes also need dissolved organic carbon to complete the process too. And so at some point they will run out of dissolved organic carbon, and then they won't be able to eat anything and then they'll die. So they need both like something to eat and the dissolved organic carbon to facilitate it. So it's not like the perfect solution. Unless you like, we're also then dumping dissolved organic carbon down wells too, which we all know we shouldn't dump things down wells. So.
I have two things that I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
First,
Just a minute.
First, when we would drive in the sandhills, when the kids were small and when I was young, there were no pivots, there were no wells, there was no corn. It was grass and cows. And now there are fields of corn and pivots everywhere. That's number one, and it seems to me that that is going to affect the groundwater quality in the sandhills and perhaps the ability of the sandhills to work as an aquifer. And the second thing, and this may not be in your wheelhouse at all, but we owned a farm that is south of the interstate between Brady and Maxwell, closer to Brady. And I was surprised to find that without notice to us, because we didn't live in the district, we were being taxed as the NRD purchased farmland and put down wells to pump water out of the Oglala aquifer and send it to a different NRD, to the Republican River, to send it down the Republican River to satisfy Kansas demand for water. And it seemed to me that the Nebraska Constitution is pretty clear that you can't move water from one drainage district to another. And I didn't understand how that was happening. And since we didn't live in the district, I couldn't question anybody about it.
Yeah.
That's surface water. Groundwater has a different set of rules.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, yes, the increase of agriculture, and it's specifically irrigated agriculture, will cause groundwater quality to degrade. And I wanted to bring this map back up because it's not the sandhills, but up in Brazil where we have, I guess you can't really see a red dot on red things, but up in Brazil in the northeast where we have a lot of irrigation that's happened, that's very sandy soil. And so like one of the reasons why you have like such high groundwater nitrate is because sand will just take everything down instantly. It's why it makes a really good aquifer. It's why the sandhills are a really good aquifer, because it just recharges really quickly, but it takes everything with it. And so as you see more and more irrigation spread to places where maybe it wasn't historically, you will most likely see the groundwater degrade as well. And that's not to say like, the problem is that like there isn't like a test farm with like an ideal farmer that's doing, you know, the latest and greatest perfect nutrient management strategy to like test it on, to know like maybe if we perfectly spoon-fed and could predict every weather so we didn't irrigate and then have a storm come in, you know, like the next day, like maybe we could do it, but like we've never actually shown that any of our strategies work. Like all of our reduction strategies have never, they're not perfect. So there will be some degradation. In terms of the water law is again not my strong suit, but there is and it's an ongoing lawsuit because there's the fact that we have to have so much water in the Republican when it hits the Kansas-Nebraska border, right? And to do so, we can't just straight shoot it from the Platte, right? But let's see, where's the groundwater mound? None of these are great pictures. But we have this groundwater mound, which if we go back a slide, it's in the Tri-Basin NRD. The Tri-Basin NRD is named such because it's in 3 different basins, the Platte, the Big Blue, Little Blue, and the Republican. And so a lot of what they're doing is moving, and this isn't the only place that this occurs, but this is they've done a lot of models, and they're well, some of this groundwater is just naturally now flowing into the Republican, and can we quantify that, and can that satisfy these legal rights? It's more out of my wheelhouse once we get into that, but there are questionable choices made in terms of how we handle water in the state in a variety of ways, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Here goes Mike.
How is fertilizer, I'm trying to say fertilizer and pesticide use in Lincoln's lawns affecting groundwater and surface water?
So I don't think I'd eat anything that I got out of Holmes Lake. I don't think anyone is into that. So Lincoln sits in the oval. The thing is that Lincoln itself, the people of Lincoln, their drinking water is not coming. I say people of Lincoln as if I'm included, I live here. Our drinking water does not come from here. It's not our groundwater. It comes from Ashland. It is literally piped all the way in from it's technically groundwater, but it's literally right underneath the Platte River, so it's basically Platte River water, but from the ground. I don't know. I don't make these decisions. But if you're driving on I-80 to Omaha and you cross the Platte River and you look north, there's that island with the big, that's where all the wells are. And they're giant wells that have these big arms that go out, and they're pretty shallow. So that's where all of your water is coming from. They are building more wells in the Missouri technically. But for the moment, that's where all of your water is coming from. So I don't know what the people of Lincoln are doing to the groundwater underneath Lincoln, because no one is really looking at that. No one is really using it, so no one has really studied it. There are monitoring wells, a few throughout the city that Lower Platte South takes care of. But I don't really know what any of that data is. And I don't know that anyone is particularly interested in it, to be honest.
But some of our surface water goes into the Platte River.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff ends up in our surface water, Salt Creek.
Yeah. So the Platte generally does have spikes of nitrate throughout the summer. It's not terrible. I don't know if this will make you guys feel better or not. I will say that your drinking water is safe and that everything is below the limits. And I do know that because we do a lot of work with Lincoln water systems. But they tend to have spikes of arsenic in the spring and the fall because of the redox chemistry flipping over. They have a few wells that have some increasing magnesium at the moment. Unfortunately, that's just geologic. And they do generally have a few spikes of atrazine every spring.
question? Do we have one more question before we call it a night? One more burning question out in the audience? Well, I'm sure Michaela will stick around for a few minutes and answer questions. We've got the cookies and refreshments, so thank you, Michaela.
It's amazing how many people.